I am staring at a crinkled, yellowed hospital receipt from 15 years ago, trembling in a tiny basement apartment that smells like cheap vanilla candles and boxed macaroni and cheese. I am Victoria Vance, the ruthless, untouchable CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, a woman who fires executives before they can even finish their morning espresso. And yet right now I am sitting on a faded thrift store sofa, sobbing uncontrollably over a piece of paper I found hidden in the closet of my building's night security guard. I invaded his privacy. I went snooping where I had no business looking, and what I found completely shattered my entire understanding of who I am, how I got here, and who this humble, quiet single dad truly is. I have a question for you, and I need you to be brutally honest with me, because the guilt and the shock are eating me alive. Was I wrong for what I did? Tell me if you would have done the same thing if you were trapped in a stranger's home, desperate and freezing, and stumbled upon a secret that literally altered the course of your entire life. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, you have to understand who I am, or rather, who I forced myself to become. The business world calls me the Ice Queen, a moniker I earned by stripping away every ounce of empathy I possessed to climb to the top of the corporate ladder. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I was born into the kind of grinding, relentless poverty that steals your childhood. When I was 17, my little brother Leo was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The surgeries he needed were experimental and astronomically expensive. My parents worked themselves to the bone, drowning in debt, weeping at the kitchen table every night as the hospital threatened to discharge Leo because our insurance ran out. I remember the exact moment my heart turned to stone. I swore to myself as I watched my brother's pale, frail body hooked up to those machines that I would never ever be powerless again. I would amass so much wealth and so much power that the world could never dictate who lived and who died in my family. And then a miracle happened. An anonymous philanthropic trust paid Leo's $500,000 medical bill in full. Just like that, the debt was gone, Leo got the surgery, and he lived. But the trauma of that helplessness never left me. I spent the next 15 years clawing my way to the top. I built Vance Innovations from a tiny startup into a global conglomerate. I sacrificed friendships, relationships, and my own mental health. I lived in a breathtaking, sterile, $30 million penthouse at the very top of the Vance Tower, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass that let me look down on the city. Completely isolated, completely alone, and completely in control. But my control ended the moment I stepped into the lobby of my own building and truly noticed Marcus. Marcus Hayes was the night security guard for the Vance Tower. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with tired, kind eyes and a faded uniform that always looked a little too big on him. What annoyed me most about Marcus wasn't his presence, but his persistent, unwavering cheerfulness. No matter how late I worked, no matter how deeply I scowled as I marched past his desk at 2 in the morning, he always stood up, smiled warmly, and offered me a cup of terrible burnt drip coffee from his cheap machine. I never took it. I would just nod curtly and step into my private elevator. But then I noticed the child. One evening, a week before the annual board meeting, I came down to the lobby and saw a little girl sitting behind the heavy marble security desk. She couldn't have been older than 6, with messy pigtails and a missing front tooth, diligently coloring in a book. I stopped dead in my tracks. I marched up to the desk and coldly informed Marcus that the lobby of a Fortune 500 company was not a subsidized daycare center. I expected him to cower, to apologize profusely, to beg for his job. Instead, he looked at me with a calm, gentle dignity that unsettled me. He explained, his voice low and steady, that his babysitter had canceled, that he was a single father, and that his daughter, Lily, was exceptionally quiet and would not disturb anyone. He didn't make excuses. He just stated the facts with a quiet pride that made my threats feel hollow. I told him to make sure she was out of sight by morning and walked away, but the image of that little girl's crayons scattered across the cold corporate marble stayed with me. Over the next few months, Lily became a fixture on Friday nights. I caught myself looking for her. Sometimes she would wave at me, her tiny hand flapping enthusiastically, and despite my absolute best efforts to remain an unfeeling monolith, I found myself offering a tight, awkward little wave back. I started to notice other things about Marcus, too. I noticed the way he carefully wrapped Lily in his oversized jacket when the lobby AC kicked into high gear. I noticed the worn-out soles of his shoes, contrasted against the pristine neatness of his pressed uniform. I noticed the way he spoke to the cleaning staff, treating them with a level of respect and genuine interest that I had never bothered to muster. He was a man who had nothing, Yet he seemed to possess a wealth of peace that I, with my billions, couldn't even begin to comprehend. The real shift, the event that spiraled my carefully orchestrated life completely out of control, happened during the week of the Great Freeze. The meteorologists had predicted a storm, but no one anticipated the sheer ferocity of the blizzard that slammed into the city that Tuesday. It was a whiteout, a violent howling monster of ice and snow that paralyzed the entire metropolis in a matter of hours. The subway system flooded and froze, the roads became impassable mountains of ice, and the city's power grid, strained beyond capacity, began to fail in massive rolling blackouts. I was in my penthouse wrapping up a conference call with overseas investors when the power died. It wasn't just the lights. The backup generators for the residential tiers failed entirely due to a frozen fuel line. Within an hour, my $30 million glass mansion became a deadly icebox. The temperature plummeted. The electronic locks on my private elevator doors froze shut, but the stairwell was accessible. Shivering violently, wrapped in my designer coats that offered no real warmth against the plunging temperature, I descended 60 floors in the dark, using the flashlight on my rapidly dying phone. When I finally stumbled into the lobby, I was exhausted, terrified, and freezing to death. The lobby was entirely powered by a separate, secure emergency grid, glowing with a dim, yellow light. And there was Marcus, pacing the floor, looking out at the apocalyptic whiteout. When he saw me, he didn't gloat. He didn't treat me like the cold, demanding boss who had threatened his job. He rushed over, took one look at my blue lips and shaking hands, and immediately guided me to the security desk. He wrapped his own heavy wool uniform coat around my shoulders and handed me a cup of that terrible drip coffee. It was the best thing I had ever tasted in my entire life. He explained that the city was completely locked down. A state of emergency had been declared, and the National Guard was warning everyone to stay indoors. "You can't go back up there, Miss Vance," he said, his voice a comforting rumble over the howling wind outside. "The temperature in the upper floors is going to hit sub-zero by morning. You'll freeze." I asked him what he suggested I do, my voice trembling. My usual authority completely stripped away by the raw power of nature. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before offering the only solution. As the head night guard, Marcus was provided with a small, rudimentary caretaker's apartment in the sub-basement of the building, a space that was tied directly to the building's core heating and emergency power grid. It was safe, it was warm, and he offered it to me without a second thought. I had no choice. I followed him down a series of concrete stairwells far below the gleaming marble and glass of my empire into a world I never knew existed. The apartment was tiny, just a living area with a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and one bedroom. It was incredibly modest, filled with secondhand furniture and worn rugs, but it was spotlessly clean, and more importantly, it was suffocatingly warm. Lily was asleep on the sofa, clutching a stuffed bear. Marcus quietly explained that I could have his bed in the back room, and he would take the floor in the living area near Lily. I tried to argue, my pride flaring up, but he simply held up a hand and smiled. "You're the guest, Ms. Vance, and right now you're shivering too hard to argue. Please, just take the room." For the first 2 days, the storm raged on, and we were completely trapped in that subterranean bunker. Cut off from my phone, my emails, my board of directors, I was forced into a state of existence I hadn't experienced since I was a teenager. Stillness. I sat on the faded sofa and watched this man be a father. I watched him make pancakes from a cheap mix, turning them into funny shapes to make Lily laugh. I watched him sit cross-legged on the floor, patiently helping her with a jigsaw puzzle, his large, rough hands carefully placing the tiny cardboard pieces. I watched the way he looked at her, with a love so profound and absolute that it actually made my chest ache. I realized, sitting there in my expensive rumpled clothes, that for all my wealth, I had never created anything as beautiful or as real as the bond between this security guard and his daughter. Slowly, the ice around my heart began to thaw. I started sitting on the floor with them. I helped Lily color. I ate the canned soup Marcus prepared, and we actually talked. We didn't talk about business or stock prices. We talked about books, about the weather, about the strange, quiet beauty of the snow. He was incredibly intelligent, articulate, and observant. He noticed everything. He noticed that I chewed on the inside of my cheek when I was anxious. He noticed that I preferred the blue mug over the red one. He never pried into my life, but he listened with an intensity that made me feel entirely seen for the first time in a decade. I found myself telling him about my childhood, about the fear that drove me, about the relentless exhaustion of being the Ice Queen. And he didn't judge me. He just nodded, his eyes full of a quiet, steady understanding. So that's the situation I was in. and I had to make a choice. I was a billionaire CEO trapped in a basement with my employee, completely disarmed, completely vulnerable, and starting to feel emotions I had buried a lifetime ago. I was beginning to care for them, deeply and profoundly. But then, on the fourth night, the situation took a drastic turn, leading to the moment that brings us to where I am right now. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have kept your walls up, maintaining the professional distance, or would you have let yourself fall into the warmth of this strange, unexpected family? Tell me right now, because the decision I made to let my guard down is what ultimately led me to the truth. On the evening of the fourth day, Lily developed a sudden, spiking fever. The cheerful little girl became flushed, lethargic, and completely unresponsive, her tiny body burning up. Marcus was terrified. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind mountains of snow, but nothing was plowed and no emergency services could reach us. He had exhausted his small supply of children's medicine. The only option was a 24-hour pharmacy 3 miles away. He bundled up in every layer he owned, his face set in a mask of grim determination. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Watch her, please, Victoria. Just keep a cold cloth on her forehead. I'll be back as fast as I can." He called me Victoria, not Miss Vance. It was the first time, and it felt like a heavy anchor settling into my chest. I promised him I would guard her with my life. He ran out into the freezing night, leaving me alone in the apartment with his sick child. I spent the next hour frantically changing the cool washcloths on her forehead, singing softly to her, feeling a desperate, protective instinct I didn't know I possessed. As the hours dragged on, the cold from the concrete walls began to seep into the room. Lily started to shiver violently despite her fever. I panicked. I needed to find more blankets. I tore through the small closet in the living room, finding nothing but winter coats. Desperate, I went into Marcus's bedroom, the room he had surrendered to me, and opened the small, high closet above the dresser. I reached up blindly, feeling around for a quilt or a blanket. Instead, my hand caught the edge of a heavy cardboard box. I pulled too hard and the box tumbled down, crashing onto the floor and bursting open. Dozens of files, manila envelopes, and loose papers spilled out across the cheap carpet. I dropped to my knees, intending to frantically shove it all back in to respect his privacy, but my eyes caught a familiar logo. It was the crest of the Vanguard Philanthropic Trust, the exact same trust that had paid my brother's medical bills 15 years ago. My heart stopped. My hands began to shake as I picked up the document. It wasn't a brochure, it was a bank transfer ledger. It showed the disbursement of funds. I scrambled through the papers, my breath catching in my throat as I pulled out document after document. Patents, blueprints for advanced algorithmic software, financial statements showing the liquidation of millions of dollars of assets. And then, I found a faded magazine clipping from an old tech journal. There was a picture of a much younger Marcus, looking sharp, brilliant, and confident in a tailored suit. The headline read, "Marcus Thorne, Silicon Valley's brightest star, steps away from billion-dollar empire." Thorne, his last name wasn't Hayes, it was Thorne. He was the founder of Thorne Systems, the very company whose revolutionary algorithm I had ruthlessly acquired for pennies on the dollar during their mysterious bankruptcy years ago. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the paper trail of a man's life, piecing together the most heartbreaking, mind-shattering puzzle. Marcus hadn't gone bankrupt because of poor business decisions. He had liquidated his entire empire, drained his own personal wealth, and funneled it all into an anonymous philanthropic trust designed to pay off the medical debts of desperate families. Families like mine. He gave away his fortune, his company, and his future to save strangers. And then, according to the medical bills I found at the bottom of the box, tragedy had struck his own home. His wife had fallen ill with a rapid, aggressive cancer. Without his immense wealth, stuck in the bureaucratic nightmare of the standard medical system, he couldn't get her the experimental treatments she needed in time. She died. He lost his wife because he had given away the money that could have saved her, to save my brother, to save me. I was gasping for air, tears streaming down my face, clutching the hospital receipt that bore my parents' names and my brother's patient ID, stamped paid in full with Marcus's authorized signature beneath it. The man making me cheap coffee, the man I had threatened to fire, the man currently trudging through a lethal blizzard to save his daughter, was my savior. He was the architect of my life. He had sacrificed his world so I could build mine, and in return, I had treated him like garbage. I sat on the floor and wept until my lungs burned, utterly crushed by the weight of my own arrogance and his silent, staggering sacrifice. When I heard the heavy basement door creak open an hour later, I was still sitting on the floor, surrounded by the papers. Marcus stumbled in, covered in snow, panting heavily, clutching a small bag from the pharmacy. He rushed past the bedroom doorway toward Lily, but then he froze, looking back at me. He saw the box. He saw the papers scattered around my knees. He saw the receipt in my trembling hand. The color drained from his face and his broad shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me of snooping. He just let out a long, ragged sigh and leaned against the doorframe, looking older and more exhausted than I had ever seen him. "I was looking for a blanket," I whispered, my voice cracking, tears continuing to spill over my cheeks. "She was shivering, Marcus. I was just looking for a blanket." Why didn't you tell me? All this time you watched me parade around that building, the building I bought with the success of the company I built on the ashes of yours. Why didn't you say anything?" Marcus walked over to the sofa, administered the medicine to a half-asleep Lily, and then slowly walked into the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the mattress across from me. "Tell you what, Victoria," he asked softly, "that I gave away my money? I did that because it was the right thing to do. I didn't do it to buy gratitude. When my wife died, I realized that the corporate world, the relentless pursuit of more, it didn't mean anything. I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to raise Lily in peace. When I saw you years later walking into Vance Innovations, I recognized you. I knew who you were, but I also saw how hard you had become. I didn't want your pity, and I didn't want your money. I just wanted to do my job, go home, and be a father." I crawled across the floor, grabbed his rough, cold hands, and pressed them to my forehead, sobbing completely unreservedly. "You saved my brother," I choked out. "You saved my family. I owe you everything. Everything I have is because of you." Marcus gently pulled his hands away, cupped my tear-stained face, and looked me dead in the eyes. "You don't owe me anything, Victoria. You took the chance you were given and you built an empire. You did that, but if you really want to honor that gift, stop hiding in that glass tower. Stop pushing the world away because you're afraid to lose. Let people in." The storm cleared the next day, and the city slowly roared back to life, but I never went back to being the Ice Queen. The woman who walked down into that basement died there, and a new woman emerged. I didn't go back to my penthouse. I went straight to my corporate legal team. It took weeks of fierce, ruthless legal maneuvering, but I restructuring Vance Innovations entirely. I reinstated Marcus Thorne as a massive, silent shareholder, returning the exact percentage of the company he would have owned had his original algorithm remained his. I set up a massive, fully funded corporate childcare center in the lobby of the building, tearing out the cold marble seating to build a vibrant, warm space for the children of all my employees. But more importantly, I let people in. I let him in. Marcus and I didn't just stay friends. That week in the basement forged a bond that couldn't be broken by money, status, or pride. Today, the $30 million penthouse isn't cold and sterile anymore. It's filled with the sound of Lily running down the halls, the smell of cheap pancake mix on Sunday mornings, and the quiet, steady presence of the man who saved my life twice, once by paying a hospital bill, and once by teaching me how to actually live it. The truth is, we spend so much time building fortresses around ourselves to protect our hearts from the pain of the past, that we end up locking out the very people who are meant to heal us. Sometimes, the universe has to literally freeze you in your tracks and strip away all your power just to force you to look at the angel standing right in front of you. Please, like this video if you were on my side and you believe that true wealth is found in the people we love, not the empires we build. Subscribe for more stories like this, because I promise you, reality is far more miraculous than fiction. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I read every single one of them. I'll see you all in the next story.